The Galactic Concorde had watched Earth for over 500 years. Their observation probes had recorded everything about the small blue planet on the edge of the galaxy. They had seen the storms that could flatten cities. They had watched the ground shake and split open. They had observed creatures with sharp teeth hunting other creatures through forests and oceans. The scientists of the Concorde had given Earth a special name. They called it a Class 12 Death World. In all their records. Across thousands of star systems and millions of planets, the Concorde had never found a world so dangerous. The temperature on Earth could swing from burning hot to freezing cold in a single day. The star it orbited sent deadly radiation through its thin atmosphere. Volcanoes erupted without warning. Massive waves destroyed coastlines. Predators existed in every environment, from the deepest oceans to the highest mountains. The scientists had concluded that intelligent life could never develop on such a world. The conditions were simply too harsh. Any species that evolved there would spend all its energy just trying to survive. It would never have time to build civilizations or develop technology. They were wrong. Ambassador Veleth of the Tron delegation was the first to receive the signal. He was an old diplomat, with gray scales covering his thin body and 4 eyes that had seen many strange things during his long career. But nothing had prepared him for what appeared on his communication screen that morning. A fleet of ships had emerged from fold space near the Concorde's outer territories. The ships were ugly by galactic standards. They were blocky and rough, covered in thick armor plating and bristling with antenna arrays. They moved in tight formation with a confidence that made Veleth's stomach turn cold. The message that came with them was simple. It was broadcast on every frequency, translated into mathematical patterns that any intelligent species could understand. We come in peace. We have been alone for a very long time. We would like to meet our neighbors. Veleth immediately called an emergency session of the High Council. Within hours, representatives from 12 different species had gathered in the Great Chamber on Station Korath. They floated in their individual environment pods, each one filled with the specific atmosphere their biology required. The mood was tense and fearful. "How is this possible?" demanded Councilor Mirth of the Volcari, her crystalline body pulsing with agitated light. The Death World was supposed to be uninhabitable. "We observed them for centuries," another counselor added. "They were primitive. They were killing each other with chemical explosives just 200 years ago. And now they have fold space technology," Veleth said quietly. "They cross the galaxy in ships we never detected until they wanted us to see them." The chamber fell silent. Everyone understood what that meant. These Deathworlders had developed stealth technology that surpassed anything the Concorde possessed. They had hidden their advancement from observers who had been watching them for generations. They were far more clever and far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Captain Danny Cole stood on the bridge of the starship, Endurance, and waited for a response to his message. He was a tall man with short brown hair and calm gray eyes. He had served in the United Earth Defense Force for 20 years, working his way up from a simple mechanic to the commander of humanity's first interstellar exploration fleet. Danny had trained his entire life for this moment. Every human had. For generations, Earth governments had worked together on the greatest project in history. They had built ships in secret, hidden in underground facilities and orbital stations on the dark side of the moon. They had developed technologies that would have seemed like magic to their grandparents. And they had done it all while knowing that someone out there was watching. "Lieutenant Santos," Danny said, turning to his communications officer. "Any response yet?" Maria Santos looked up from her console. She was a small woman with dark hair and quick, intelligent eyes. She had spent her entire career studying languages, both human and theoretical alien ones. Now she would finally get to use that knowledge. "They're talking to each other, Captain," she reported. A lot of chatter on multiple frequencies. They seem confused. Danny smiled slightly. I imagine they are. Keep monitoring. Let me know when they're ready to talk. The wait lasted 3 days. During that time, Maria worked without rest, analyzing the alien communications and building a basic translation matrix. The aliens used at least a dozen different languages, but they all shared common mathematical roots. Maria was able to construct a working vocabulary faster than anyone had predicted. When the invitation finally came, it was formal and cautious. The Galactic Concord requested that a small delegation from Earth travel to Station Korath for diplomatic discussions. They provided coordinates and detailed instructions for approaching the station safely. Danny selected his team carefully. He brought Maria as his translator. He brought his first officer, a serious man named Rick Dunn, who had a gift for reading people and situations. He brought Dr. Beth Howard, the fleet's chief medical officer, in case anyone needed to understand human biology. And he brought Sergeant Paul Martinez, a quiet soldier whose job was to keep everyone safe. The shuttle trip to Station Korath took 6 hours. When they arrived, they found an enormous structure floating in space, a wheel-shaped station that rotated slowly to create artificial gravity. Hundreds of ships were docked around its outer edge, representing dozens of different species. Ambassador Veleth met them at the airlock. He tried to hide his fear, but Danny could see it in the way his 4 eyes kept darting between the humans. The alien was trembling slightly, and Danny realized with surprise that Veleth was genuinely afraid of them. Welcome to Station Korath, Veleth said through a translation device. We have prepared quarters for your delegation. The temperature and atmosphere have been adjusted to match your homeworld's conditions. Thank you, Ambassador, Danny replied. We appreciate your hospitality. As they walked through the station's corridors, Danny noticed other aliens stopping to stare at them. Some pressed themselves against the walls to let the humans pass. Others simply froze in place, watching with wide eyes. They're terrified of us, Maria whispered. Danny nodded. He understood why. The aliens had spent centuries studying Earth. They knew about the wars, the predators, the natural disasters. They knew that humans had evolved in conditions that would kill most galactic species within hours. In the eyes of the Concord, the human delegation wasn't a group of peaceful explorers. They were monsters from a nightmare world, walking calmly through the station as if they owned it. And in a way, Danny thought, maybe they did. Humanity had survived everything Earth had thrown at them. They had conquered their own planet and reached for the stars. Now they were here, ready to take their place in a galaxy that had never expected them to exist. The arrival of the Deathworlders had altered everything. And this was only the beginning. Word spread through the Galactic Concord faster than any ship could travel. Every species, on every world, soon knew about the visitors from the death world called Earth. The news channels broadcast images of the human delegation walking through Station Korath. Scientists published emergency reports about human biology. Philosophers debated what the arrival of Deathworlders meant for galactic civilization. Most of all, everyone was afraid. Commander Rick Dunn noticed the fear everywhere he went. When he entered a room, conversation stopped. When he walked down a corridor, aliens moved out of his way. They watched him with expressions he had learned to recognize as horror and fascination. Mixed together. Rick was a patient man. He had served under Captain Cole for 15 years, and he had learned to stay calm in difficult situations. But the constant staring was starting to wear on him. He felt like an animal in a zoo, something dangerous and strange that others came to observe from a safe distance. The Concord had arranged a series of cultural exchange events. The idea was simple. Humans and aliens would spend time together, learning about each other's customs and biology. Ambassador Veleth hoped that familiarity would reduce fear. It did not work as planned. The first event was a shared meal. The Concorde's finest chefs had prepared dishes from a dozen different worlds, carefully selected to be safe for human digestion. Rick sat at a long table with representatives from 6 species, trying his best to make polite conversation. The food was strange. Some dishes were too sweet. Others had textures that made Rick's mouth feel numb. But he ate everything that was offered to him, chewing carefully and swallowing without complaint. "You consume that without difficulty?" asked the Velkari delegate, her crystalline body flickering with surprise. "That dish contains compounds that would cause severe digestive distress in most species." Rick shrugged. "It's a little spicy, but it's fine." The aliens at the table exchanged looks of disbelief. Later, Rick learned that the dish in question had been used as a weapon in ancient Velkari wars. The spices it contained could paralyze their nervous systems. He had eaten it like it was nothing special. Nurse Katie Bell caused an even bigger reaction during a medical demonstration. She had been asked to explain human biology to a group of alien doctors. What she described left them speechless. Humans can survive the loss of significant amounts of blood, she explained, pointing to a diagram of the human circulatory system. Our bodies can compensate and keep functioning. We can also survive the removal of certain organs, like the spleen or gallbladder. In some cases, we can even lose a limb and continue to fight or work. Continue to fight. One doctor repeated, his voice shaking. "Yes, we have recorded cases of human soldiers completing their missions after receiving wounds that would kill other species instantly. Our bodies produce natural painkillers during extreme stress. We call it adrenaline." The alien doctors looked at each other with expressions of pure horror. In their experience, any serious injury meant death or complete incapacitation. The idea that a creature could lose a limb and keep fighting was beyond their understanding. Katie continued her presentation, unaware of the effect she was having. She talked about human endurance, how runners on Earth would sometimes cover more than 40 kilometers in a single race. She explained pursuit predation, the hunting technique that humans had evolved over millions of years. Humans could not outrun their prey, but they could outlast it. They would chase an animal for hours or even days, never stopping, until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. "You hunt by refusing to stop?" a doctor asked. "It's how our ancestors survived," Katie said with a smile. "We're very stubborn." The word spread quickly. The Deathworlders were not just resistant to damage. They were relentless. They did not stop when they were injured. They did not stop when they were tired. They simply kept going until they achieved their goal or died trying. Meanwhile, Captain Danny Cole was dealing with questions from the High Council. The Concorde's leaders wanted to understand human history, human culture, human technology. Danny answered as honestly as he could, but he knew that every answer made the aliens more frightened. "You developed nuclear weapons before you developed space travel?" Counselor Mirth asked, her crystalline body pulsing with agitation. "Yes," Danny admitted. "We almost destroyed ourselves several times. And yet you survived." "We survived. We learned. We got better," the counselors whispered among themselves. Danny waited patiently, keeping his expression calm and friendly. "Your species has fought 2 global wars," another counselor said. "Wars that killed millions of your own kind." "That's correct." "How?" "How could any species inflict such damage on itself and survive?" Danny thought about his answer carefully. "We're a competitive species," he said finally. "We compete for resources, for territory, for ideas. Sometimes that competition becomes violent. But we also cooperate. We form families, communities, nations. We protect each other. When we face a common enemy, we unite against it. And if you have no common enemy, then sometimes we fight each other." Danny paused. We're not proud of our history, counselor, but we don't hide from it either. We are what we are. We've learned from our mistakes, and we're trying to be better. The council meeting ended without any clear resolution. The aliens did not know what to do with the humans. They could not simply ignore them. The Deathworlder fleet was parked in their space, and it was clear that humanity was not going away. But they also could not trust them. How could they trust a species that had nearly destroyed itself with nuclear fire? That night, Rick Dunn was walking through the station's observation deck when he encountered a young alien standing alone by the viewport. The creature was small and covered in soft gray fur. Its large eyes reflected the starlight as it stared out at the darkness. May I join you? Rick asked. The alien flinched, then nodded slowly. Rick moved to stand beside it, keeping a respectful distance. You are one of the Deathworlders, the alien said. Its voice was soft and musical. I'm human, yes. Are you going to hurt us? Rick looked down at the small creature. It was trembling slightly, its fur standing on end. He realized that this alien, whoever it was, had probably grown up hearing stories about Earth. Stories about the monsters that lived there, the impossible conditions, the endless violence. No, Rick said gently. We're not here to hurt anyone. We spent a very long time alone, wondering if anyone else was out there. Now we know we're not alone, and that's wonderful. We want to make friends, not enemies. The alien was quiet for a long moment. Then it looked up at Rick with those large, starlit eyes. My name is Trill, it said. I am a student here on the station. I'm Rick. It's nice to meet you, Trill. They stood together in silence, watching the stars. Rick knew that one conversation would not change the galaxy's opinion of humanity, but it was a start. Every friendship had to begin somewhere. The Deathworlders had arrived. Now they needed to prove that they could be trusted. And that, Rick knew, would take time. The Galactic Concord had maintained peace for 3,000 years. It was their greatest achievement and their deepest pride. 12 species had learned to live together, to trade and communicate and settle their differences without violence. War had become a thing of the past, a barbaric practice that civilized beings had abandoned long ago. This philosophy had served them well against minor threats. When aggressive species appeared on their borders, the Concord would negotiate, offer gifts and trade agreements, find ways to satisfy everyone without bloodshed. When negotiations failed, they would simply retreat, giving up territory rather than fighting for it. Space was vast, after all. There was always somewhere else to go, but the Krathver were different. They came from a distant region of the galaxy, a cluster of harsh worlds that had produced a species built for conquest. The Krathver were tall and powerful, with thick armored skin and 4 muscular arms that could crush metal. Their culture valued strength above all else. They saw the universe as a competition, and they intended to win. The first Krathver attacks came without warning. 3 Concord colonies on the outer rim went silent in a single week. When rescue ships arrived, they found only ruins. Buildings had been burned. Infrastructure had been destroyed. The colonists were gone, either killed or taken as slaves. High Chancellor Orith called an emergency session of the council. The old leader's face was pale with worry as he addressed the gathered representatives. We have attempted to contact the Krathver leadership, he announced. Our diplomats have offered trade agreements, territorial concessions, anything they might want. Their response was the same each time. He activated a recording. A harsh, growling voice filled the chamber. The weak do not negotiate with the strong. You will submit or you will die. There is no third option. The council erupted in panic. Representatives shouted over each other, demanding action, demanding protection. But what could they do? The Concord's military forces were small and poorly trained. They had not fought a real war in 3,000 years. They had forgotten how Captain Danny Cole watched the chaos from his seat in the observer's gallery. He had been invited to attend council sessions as a gesture of goodwill, though he was not allowed to speak. Beside him, Sergeant Paul Martinez sat in grim silence. "They're going to lose," Paul said quietly. Danny nodded. He had seen the Krathver attack footage. He had studied their tactics and their weapons. They were not subtle, but they were effective. They overwhelmed their enemies with brute force, crushing resistance before it could organize. "They need help," Danny said. "Are we going to give it to them?" Danny did not answer immediately. He was thinking about Earth, about all the wars his people had fought against each other. Humans knew how to wage war. They had spent their entire history perfecting the art of violence. But did that mean they should get involved in someone else's fight? The decision came 3 weeks later, after 2 more Concord worlds had fallen. High Chancellor Earth requested a private meeting with Captain Cole. When Danny arrived at the Chancellor's chambers, he found a broken man waiting for him. "We have watched your species," Earth said. His voice was tired and hollow. "We have seen what you can do. Your capacity for violence is unprecedented in our records. We hoped we would never need to ask this of you." He paused, struggling to find the words. "We are dying, Captain. The Krathver are destroying everything we have built. We have no defense against them. We have forgotten how to fight." Danny sat in silence, letting the Chancellor speak. "I am asking you for help. I am begging you. If you do not aid us, my people and all the peoples of the Concord will be enslaved or destroyed." Danny thought about his crew. He thought about the young alien Trill, who had shared that quiet moment with Commander Dunn on the observation deck. He thought about Ambassador Veleth, who had trembled with fear at their first meeting but still had the courage to welcome them. These aliens had spent centuries afraid of humanity. They had expected monsters and found neighbors instead. Now they were facing real monsters, and they had nowhere else to turn. Danny made his decision. "I need to contact Earth," he said. "This is too important for me to decide alone." The message traveled across the stars at faster than light speeds. It reached Earth's United Defense Council within hours. The response came back even faster. Humanity would help, but they would do it their way. 3 weeks later, a new fleet emerged from Fold Space near Station Korth. It was not the small exploration force that had arrived months before. This was the Second Fleet, a full military armada under the command of Admiral Grace Patterson. Grace was a small woman with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. She had served in Earth's military for 40 years, rising through the ranks through a combination of brilliant strategy and ruthless efficiency. She was not cruel, but she was pragmatic. She understood that sometimes violence was necessary to protect the innocent. Her fleet consisted of 47 warships, each one designed for combat. They were sleek and deadly, their hulls covered in stealth plating that made them nearly invisible to sensors. They carried weapons that the Concord had never imagined, technologies born from centuries of human conflict. Ambassador Veleth came aboard the flagship to meet with Admiral Patterson. He was still nervous around humans, but he had learned to hide it better. "Admiral, the Concord is grateful for your assistance," he said. "How do you plan to approach the Krathver? Perhaps we could begin with diplomatic overtures, try to find a peaceful solution." Grace looked at the alien for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice calm and measured. "Ambassador, the Krathver have made their intentions clear. They do not want peace. They want conquest. They have already killed thousands of your people and enslaved thousands more. Then what do you suggest?" "I suggest we show them what happens when you threaten beings that Deathworlders have decided to protect." Veleth felt a chill run down his spine. He had always known that humans were dangerous. He had read the reports, seen the footage, heard the stories. But until that moment, he had never truly understood what it meant. The humans were not going to negotiate with the Krathvor. They were not going to retreat or surrender territory. They were going to fight with all the skill and fury that their violent history had taught them. And somewhere deep inside, despite his fear, Veleth felt something he had not felt in a long time. Hope. The Deathworlders had arrived, and they had chosen to stand with the Concord. The Krathvor did not know what was coming for them, but they would learn soon enough. The Krathvor had conquered Vareth Prime 6 months ago. It had been one of the Concord's most beautiful worlds, a planet of rolling green hills and crystal-clear lakes. 3 million citizens had lived there in peace before the invasion. Now the survivors worked in labor camps, building weapons for their conquerors. The Krathvor commander on Vareth Prime was General Krethak, a massive warrior who had led dozens of successful conquests. He had fortified the planet with over 2 million soldiers, confident that no force in the galaxy could threaten his position. His orbital defenses were impenetrable. His ground troops were unstoppable. Or so he believed. Admiral Grace Patterson studied the tactical display aboard her flagship. The holographic image showed Vareth Prime surrounded by a network of defense satellites and warships. The Krathvor had built a fortress in space, and they were certain it could not be broken. "Lieutenant Commander Brooks," Grace said calmly, "begin the operation." Nate Brooks was a young officer with a sharp mind and steady hands. He had trained his entire life for moments like this. He gave the order, and the Second Fleet began to move. The first phase of the attack was designed to confuse. Human ships appeared and disappeared across the system, their stealth technology making them nearly impossible to track. The Krathvor sensors went crazy, detecting threats everywhere and nowhere at the same time. General Krethak ordered his fleet to investigate, splitting his forces to chase the phantom signals. It was exactly what Grace wanted him to do. The second phase was brutal and fast. While the Krathvor fleet was scattered, the main human force cloaked directly behind their orbital defense stations. The battle lasted less than an hour. Human weapons tore through Krathvor shields like paper. Defense satellites exploded in silent flashes of light. The orbital fortress that had seemed invincible was reduced to floating debris. "The sky is clear, Admiral," Nate reported. "Ready for ground operations." Grace nodded. "Send in the landing force." The troop carriers descended through Vareth Prime's atmosphere like falling stars. Inside them, human soldiers prepared for combat. They checked their weapons, adjusted their armor, and waited for the doors to open. Specialist Amy Price was in the first wave. She was a small woman with dark skin and fierce eyes. She had grown up in a poor neighborhood on Earth, fighting for everything she had. The military had given her purpose and discipline. Now she would use both to free people she had never met. The carriers touched down in the hills, outside the main Krathvor base. Amy led her squad through terrain that the enemy had considered impassable. The hills were steep and rocky, covered in thorny vegetation that would have stopped most species. But Amy and her squad were human. They pushed through the thorns, ignoring the scratches on their skin. They climbed the rocks without complaint. They moved fast and quiet, covering ground that should have taken hours in less than 30 minutes. The Krathvor sentries never saw them coming. The first battle was over in seconds. Amy's squad eliminated the guard post with precision and efficiency. No alarms were raised. No reinforcements were called. The humans simply appeared, struck, and vanished into the terrain. Across the planet, similar scenes played out. Human forces attacked from directions the Krathvor had not defended, exploited weaknesses that the enemy had not recognized. They moved at night, in bad weather, across terrain that should have been impossible to cross. The Krathvor were brave warriors, but they had never faced an enemy like this. They were used to fighting species that tired quickly, that needed rest and comfort. that would retreat when wounded. Humans did none of these things. Corporal Derek Lane became a legend during the battle for Bridgepoint, a critical crossing over the planet's largest river. The Krathver had sent a massive force to retake the bridge, knowing that losing it would cut their supply lines in half. Derek's squad of 8 soldiers was all that stood in their way. The first wave of Krathver attacked at dawn. Derek and his people held their position, pouring fire into the advancing enemy. The Krathver fell by the dozens, but more kept coming. They were certain that such a small force would break under pressure. Hours passed. The sun climbed high and then began to sink. Derek's squad took casualties. 2 soldiers were wounded badly, but they kept fighting. One lost an arm to a Krathver blade and continued to fire his weapon with his remaining hand. Fall back. The Krathver commander ordered finally, unable to believe what he was seeing. These creatures are insane. When reinforcements finally reached Bridgepoint 14 hours later, they found Derek still at his post. He was bleeding from a dozen wounds. He had not eaten or slept in over a day, but he was still standing, still ready to fight. "You were supposed to retreat," his commanding officer said. Derek looked up with tired eyes. Didn't get the memo. The story spread through both armies like wildfire. The Krathver had always believed they were the strongest warriors in the galaxy. Now they faced an enemy that would not stop, would not surrender, would not die when it was supposed to. The liberation of Vareth Prime took 72 hours. When it was over, more than 500,000 Krathver soldiers were dead or captured. The survivors fled into the wilderness, hunted by human forces that tracked them relentlessly. General Krethek was captured on the 3rd day. When human soldiers dragged him before Admiral Patterson, he was still defiant. "You may have won this battle," he growled, "but the Dominion has endless armies. You cannot defeat us all." Grace looked at the fallen general with cold eyes. "Your Dominion has never faced an enemy like us," she said. "We come from a world that tried to kill us every day. We survived storms and earthquakes and ice ages. We survived predators and plagues and each other. We have been fighting since before we could walk upright." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You thought you were predators. You thought the galaxy was full of prey waiting to be conquered. But you made a mistake. You threatened people that we have decided to protect." She straightened and turned away. "Taken to the holding cells. We have more battles to fight." The news of Vareth Prime's liberation spread across the galaxy. For the first time in months, the peoples of the Concord had reason to hope. The Deathworlders had arrived, and they were winning. But the war was far from over. The Krathver Dominion was vast, and their armies were still powerful. The battle for Vareth Prime was only the beginning. The humans knew this. They had prepared for a long war. They had supplies, reinforcements, and strategies that the Krathver could not imagine. Most importantly, they had something the Krathver did not understand. They had patience. They had endurance. They had the stubborn refusal to give up that had allowed their species to survive on a death world for millions of years. The Krathver would learn to fear that stubbornness. They would learn what it meant to fight an enemy that simply refused to stop. The Deathworlders were coming, and nothing in the galaxy could stand against them. The war against the Krathver Dominion lasted 18 months. In that time, human forces fought across dozens of star systems, liberating occupied worlds and pushing the enemy back to their home territory. It was not easy. The Krathver were fierce warriors who did not surrender willingly. Every victory cost lives, both human and alien, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The Krathver had built their empire on the belief that they were the strongest species in the galaxy. They had conquered weaker races for generations, taking what they wanted and destroying anyone who opposed them. They had never met an enemy they could not defeat until now. The turning point came at the Battle of Croft Prime, the Dominion's homeworld. Admiral Grace Patterson led the largest human fleet ever assembled against the heart of the enemy empire. The battle lasted 3 days and destroyed 2/3 of the Krathver military forces. When it was over, the Dominion's leaders had no choice but to accept defeat. The surrender ceremony took place on Station Korath, where humanity had first made contact with the Concord. Representatives from every species in the galaxy gathered to witness the historic moment. The great chamber was filled with beings of all shapes and sizes, watching as the Krathva Supreme Commander signed the treaty that ended the war. Ambassador Veleth stood near the front of the crowd. His 4 eyes moved slowly across the room, taking in the scene. He remembered standing in this same chamber 2 years ago, trembling with fear as the first human delegation arrived. He remembered thinking that the Deathworlders would destroy everything the Concord had built. He had been wrong. So wonderfully, completely wrong. After the ceremony, the new Galactic Assembly convened for the first time. This was not like the old Concord Council. Humans sat among the delegates now, full members of the galactic community. Their chairs were designed for their unusual biology. Their atmosphere requirements accommodated alongside everyone else's. Veleth had been chosen to give the opening address. He made his way to the speaking platform, his old legs aching from the long day. When he turned to face the assembly, he saw a sea of faces looking back at him. Some were crystalline, some were furred, some were scaled, and some were human, watching him with those strange forward-facing predator eyes. 2 years ago, Veleth began, his voice amplified throughout the chamber. A fleet of ships arrived at our borders. They came from a world we had classified as a death world, a place so dangerous that we believed intelligent life could never survive there. He paused, gathering his thoughts. We were afraid of them. We called them monsters, Deathworlders, creatures from a nightmare. We expected them to conquer us, to destroy everything we had built over 3,000 years of peace. His gaze found Captain Danny Cole, now Rear Admiral Cole, seated among the human delegation. Instead, they reached out in friendship. They asked only to know us, to learn from us, to share in the wonders of the galaxy. And when we faced an enemy we could not defeat, they stood beside us. They fought for us. They bled for us. Vala's voice cracked slightly with emotion. We feared you, he said, speaking directly to the humans now. When you arrived, we thought you might be the end of us. Instead, you became our salvation. You showed us that strength does not have to mean cruelty. That power can be used to protect the weak instead of exploiting them. He bowed his head in the formal gesture of respect that his people used. On behalf of the peoples of the Concord, I thank you. You have earned your place among us, not through conquest, but through sacrifice. The chamber erupted in applause. Beings of every species rose to their feet, celebrating the end of the war and the beginning of a new era. Rear Admiral Cole approached the platform after the session ended. He found Veleth sitting alone, looking tired but content. That was a good speech, Ambassador, Danny said. Veleth smiled, a gesture he had learned from his human friends. I meant every word. Your people have changed everything. We just did what we've always done. We survived. We protected our own. That is exactly what makes you remarkable, Veleth replied. You come from a world that should have destroyed you. Instead, it made you strong enough to protect others. That is a gift, Admiral. A rare and precious gift. Danny sat down beside the old ambassador. They had become friends over the past 2 years, despite their many differences. Veleth had taught Danny about galactic history and politics. Danny had taught Veleth about human culture and values. They understood each other now in ways that would have seemed impossible when they first met. What happens now? Danny asked. Now we rebuild, Veleth said. The war destroyed much, but we can repair the damage. With human help, we will become stronger than before. And they did that. Dr. Beth Howard established the first interspecies medical exchange program. Human doctors traveled to alien worlds, teaching surgery techniques and trauma care. Alien physicians came to Earth, learning about human biology and sharing their own knowledge in return. Lives were saved on both sides. Chief Engineer Sam Porter led teams of human and alien engineers in rebuilding destroyed infrastructure. They built new stations, new ships, new communication networks. Each project was a collaboration, combining the best ideas from many species. Maria Santos, now director of xenolinguistics, created translation programs that made communication easier than ever before. Languages that had been isolated for millennia were now accessible to anyone. Ideas flowed freely across the galaxy. And throughout the Concord, a new saying emerged. Whenever times grew dark, whenever hope seemed lost, people would say the same thing: send for the humans. The Deathworlders never give up. The young alien Trill, who had once stood trembling beside Commander Rick Dunn on an observation deck, grew up to become an ambassador. He dedicated his life to building bridges between species, following the example set by the humans who had saved his people. Rick Dunn retired from the military and opened a school on Station Korath, teaching alien children about Earth's history and culture. His students learned about the wars, yes, but they also learned about the art, the music, the literature. They learned that humans were more than just warriors. Amy Price returned to Verth Prime after the war, helping to rebuild the communities that the Krathver had destroyed. The people there never forgot what she and her fellow soldiers had done for them. They named a city after her, a place where humans and aliens lived together in peace. Derek Lane became a trainer, teaching new generations of soldiers the skills that had saved his life at Bridgepoint. He was older now, with gray hair and scars that told stories of battles fought and won. But his eyes still held that stubborn determination that had made him a legend. Admiral Grace Patterson oversaw the creation of a joint defense force combining human military expertise with alien technology. She made sure that the galaxy would never be helpless again. No more would peaceful species fall to conquerors. No more would innocent people be enslaved. Captain Danny Cole, the man who had spoken the first words of contact, eventually retired to a small house by the ocean on Earth. He spent his final years writing about his experiences, hoping that future generations would understand what had happened when humanity reached for the stars. In his final memoir, he wrote something that became famous throughout the galaxy. We came from a world that tried to kill us every day. We survived not because we were the strongest or the fastest, but because we refused to give up. We helped each other. We protected each other. And when we finally left our death world and found others in the darkness, we did the same for them. That is who we are. That is what it means to be human. The galaxy had changed forever. The Deathworlders had arrived, and they had brought not destruction, but hope. Not conquest, but friendship. Not the end of civilization, but the beginning of something new and wonderful, and somewhere in the vastness of space. On 1,000 different worlds, beings of every species looked up at the stars and knew that they were not alone. The humans were out there, watching over them, ready to help whenever they were needed. The Deathworlders never gave up, and they never would.